This is the NA Happy Hour. Welcome, obviously. It's great to finally talk to you, Amanda. I guess to really get into things, if you could just maybe give us a little background on you personally, and then maybe we can then transfer that into, your beautiful Thompson Scott wine company,
Sure.
what you produce, why you produce it, and we'll kind of just transfer it in that way.
So I'm British. Perhaps the accent gives it away. I grew up in Hertfordshire, which is just outside London, quite leafy, and I worked in broadcasting. So I was, I guess, a storyteller most of my early life for the BBC, and I think the synergy with this business now is that storytelling part, I guess. I used to drink hard and play hard back in the days. I'm a bit older than you two, Tyler and Chris, and this was before social media. So we'd often be going on TV, sometimes after pulling all-nighters, which of course these days we would never recommend. Champagne was my poison and my buzz, and that's what really brought the party to the table in my mind. And when you couple that with the fact that I'd grown up with a really health foodie mother, so I was born in the 70s, and that was quite radical to be into health foods in the 70s. And so I was eating this really healthy and then knocking back whatever champagne was handed to me. I was in the arts space, to clarify. I used to do the fun stuff, so art, film, fashion, music. So occasionally we would be drinking champagne, and that was really what led me to this kind of crazy light bulb moment about initially creating my own champagne brand, and then eventually now moving into alcohol-free. But that's the potted history. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff happened in between, not least moving to Paris and studying wine at Cordon Bleu. So that was, I guess, a key part of the journey.
Absolutely. And was that what then inspired you to then create your own wine company? Was after you studied there? Is that kind of
No, so I moved with the seed of the idea. So when I moved to Paris, the plan was to create my own champagne, which I hadn't really realized. Obviously, I think all the best entrepreneurs say naivety is quite useful at the beginning, because no one really starts champagne brands, which I guess was quite useful, to not know then, actually, ironically. So the idea was to do that, to create an incredible champagne, to cut sugar, cut chemicals, be as open and transparent as possible about what was in the bottle. That was the seed of the idea, which was crystallized in Paris. And then I moved back to London because I wasn't going to sell snow to the Eskimos and try and launch a champagne in France. And then I moved out into Prosecco and sparkling wine in cans, still in the alcohol space. And then the question was really hanging over me, can we bring the party without the alcohol? And that kind of pop of the cork and all of those signifiers for me that get the party started. Why do I love champagne? Because of a lot of the ritual. And that really was the beginning of that genesis of the idea about creating the perfect alcohol-free sparkling.
Absolutely. Before we get into exactly how you found that beautiful product, Noughty, and alcohol-free wine you have, so what do you define as a quality Chardonnay personally? What is your ideal vision of a perfect Chardonnay?
So I became a bit of a Blanc de Blanc obsessive, and so I guess nerding out. I mean, I was lucky enough when I was doing some assistant sort of sommelier work, when we were doing our training, to have done some work at what they call a grand tasting in Paris. And I put my hand up to do the assistant work for champagne, of course, not realizing quite how hard it was at that point, because of course, with good champagne, to chill it to the perfect temperature and all of the issues surrounding serving, sommeliers will know. So for me, I was spoiled on this romance of I don't know if you guys are familiar with Olivia Krug and the Krug Champagne House, which is often considered one of the best, if not the best, for a lot of champagne aficionados. And there's a champagne that Krug make called Clos de Menil, and I was lucky enough to taste Clos de Mille 2002, which we're really nerding out now in the wine world and in Champagne. And that for me was the perfect expression of a Blanc de Blanc champagne. Sadly, I haven't drunk it since because it's many, many, many thousands of pounds and you probably can't get your hands on it. So for me, that sort of moment and taste and excitement was really imprinted on my soul, I guess. And so that formed my perception of what a perfect Chardonnay should taste like, a perfect Blanc de Blanc when it comes to the sparkling world. So no mean feat then to have that as a blueprint to create a champagne style alcohol-free. But that probably goes some way to help you understand my obsession with, I suppose, quality and palate and taste. And I guess being a wine nerd really, I think, was the key to hopefully what is my success in creating Noughty. Does that make sense? Or was that a bit of an esoteric answer?
No, yeah, I think I got that. I thought it was quite clear. I think I followed quite well. But what was the point of, like, when you knew you wanted to make it like organic? So you were talking about quality and everything. So at the time, were there just wines that weren't organic and people were just adding stuff? Because as you know, Chris and I and about everyone knows that's kind of into wine, that the labels are like, there's no nutritional facts that have to be pushed. I'm not how sure I am with the UK. I don't know the laws with that.
Oh, no. Yeah, we're all bad around the world. And this is part of my frustration, and actually really glad you raised it. It was really part of the origin of my business, in fact, was to push for greater transparency. And actually, you've touched on that point that globally, there's no one size fits all legislation. And then you get into different legal aspects, and then different country aspects, and then different language, and then lack of any definition. And we've got, I suppose, what, you know, we would impolitely call a shitstorm, but it's, you know, that is really what you've got there. And so there is so much confusion and misinformation and so many smoke and mirrors within the industry that, my goodness, how on earth do we expect consumers to decode anything? And I've just been shocked as someone who's in the industry at how shocking we are at doing that. And that's why I think it's so important that eventually legislation is changed. But without getting too stuck down those various rabbit holes, even organics has no absolute definition country by country. And, you know, the American standard that's acceptable for one organic body to certify will have a whole different analysis on what's required than the German one will, than the English one will. And that's where you see, we all know that it then becomes a minefield. So I guess to go back to your question specifically, for me, it was important that baked into my whole business philosophy was to push for, I mean, the champagne makers call it reasoned intervention, but really I was hoping to take it one step further than that and to really work in an 100% organic way. And what I really liked about particularly the German analysis on organics was it's very rigorous. Probably, I don't know if it's the most rigorous, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is. So my alcohol-free is actually made by a German maker. And fortuitously, it wasn't just the fact that they had a very rigorous process with organics in Germany, but also, fascinatingly, something I learned that I had no idea about because I came from the conventional wine trained world. Alcohol-free has a really deep history in Germany, but again, it wasn't really something that perhaps was known much publicly around the world.
Absolutely. And with German's history with beer specifically, so was it kind of like weird to have, I don't know how embedded wine is in the German culture. I know it's quite a big deal, but was that difficult in trying to find who could produce that great?
Oh my God, it was really difficult. To put it politely, it was damn near impossible actually, because I'm all about palate, and I was famous on my wine course for just being obsessed with taste and palate. And for me, that's everything. And for me, that was why I fell in love with champagne, the romance. And I don't really care about the facts, figures, and appellations. I care about the palate and the taste. That's really my buzz. And so it was a very depressing landscape when I embarked on alcohol-free, because unlike when you sort of tell people you're embarking on a champagne project, you know, there's not really any bad champagne out there. There's various different champagne, but because of the very small production and the expense, you know, there's not really any champagne makers who are making it badly. Sometimes they're not, you know, they're putting a little bit too much sugar in for my palate or whatever, but you get into alcohol-free and it was almost like flip that model, and I found it really upsetting, frustrating, depressing, that it seemed to me that a lot of alcohol-free on the global market, it wasn't even like anyone had really paid much attention to the taste, which was like kind of blew my mind, because I'm like, okay, so you're going to launch a drink, and a drink is to consume and it hits the palate, and you're not even going to care about that. I mean, that kind of blew my mind for starters. So it was almost like, what is going on here with this category? Or is it an impossible category for me to play in? So I knew that the concept was there. I knew that the need was there almost. I knew that the opportunity was there. Everything was aligned in terms of my vision, but the barrier to entry was such a clear one, which was most of them tasted horrendous. And the model for my brand is that I work with top makers and they make wine to my recipe. And I'm like, well, where are the brilliant makers? Why am I tasting nothing good here? And eventually I found an incredible maker, and he was making really lovely, lovely sparkling. It was too sweet for my palate, and it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be in my vision. But I understood that there might be something that we could do together. And that was really how the first sort of opportunity arose and how Noughty began to take some shape.
Absolutely. And can you kind of walk us through how you solved this problem then? Because I'm trying to think. So just based upon like how you just talked about it, that you kind of tacked it as I'm going to find the best tasting alcoholic wine that I like the most.
No, actually just no, alcohol-free.
Okay.
So, yeah,
so you were making sparkling alcohol-free wines. That's what you tasted?
Yes, exactly. Because I don't think it's desperately useful to approach an alcohol-free wine project singularly by going, I love this wine. I mean, I could take a wonderful Burgundy. I could take a Merceau. I'm thinking, what would I like to drink tonight, right? I could take a beautiful Burgundy, and it wouldn't necessarily make a perfect alcohol-free. It's not quite like every process of winemaking. It's not quite that simple. But equally, it goes back to that argument about process and winemaking. And of course, in the wine world, we all nerd on for hours about how much relevance is the terroir, the soil and the aspect, how much is the maker, how much is this, that, and the other. But I started to learn that the R&D, the research and development element here was not for me to taste a ton of really wonderful wines, which I've been lucky enough in my life to be able to do. It was really to see who had a good understanding of making good alcohol-free wines. And for me, that was part of unlocking the key to the opportunity, taking the key to unlock the opportunity that way around.
Absolutely. So can you walk us through exactly how it's made, if you can? And just
Sure.
kind of give background on that, and
Sure.
then we can then get into tasting it and talking
Yeah,
about
sure. So there are various methods of making it. I've learned because I was very new to that space, as I said. So our maker, a Noughty, is made using vacuum distillation, but a lot of the flavor is potentially retained when it comes to how much you're heating your wine and cooling it, and a lot of the art, I suppose, is to do with making sure you retain the flavor. And I guess going back to our point about Chardonnay, I think Chardonnay is naturally a very expressive grape, and we're using grapes not from cool climate Germany or UK, where they're now doing still wines, but and sparkling, but from southern Spain. So we're choosing sort of really nicely ripened grapes from a hotter climate. So that's sort of where we've been with Noughty.
Absolutely. And I believe with vacuum distillation, doesn't it like heat the product at a lower temperature?
Yeah, exactly. And a a lot of retaining what you want in the end product is to do with how high or low, how, you know, how much you decide to try and play around with that process.
Absolutely. I guess before we get into drinking it and talking more about the product itself, Chris, do you have anything to add before we dive right into it? Or
no, I'm excited. I'm almost catching your contagious now love of champagne and sparkling. Was it 2 summers ago when I was on vacation with my family, and some of our good family friends recommended the book The Widow Clicquot.
Right.
So I read that book. I listened to it on Audible on the way back down to Baltimore, and from there that kind of opened my eyes to all of this about champagne I never knew. And so I started trying more and more sparkling, and exactly as you're saying, like that journey of falling in love with it, what it celebrates. When I finished my master's degree, I went out and bought a bottle of Le Veuve Clicquot and just enjoyed that myself, because it brings, the bottle itself and the product in the glass screams celebration and passion and love. And you talking about that, there's a smile growing on my face, and it's awesome.
And that for me beautifully sums up why I'm really here in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Absolutely.
So I say let's get into it, especially before this cork next to me pops, because I already took the bracket off.
Do it, because mine's open already. I couldn't resist, because
my cork is slowly pushing the pressure up right now.
Let's do it.
There we go.
I'm all ready as well.
Now, should we have gotten a saber to open this?
That would have been fun. I've never dared try.
Me either.
But you know what? There's always a first time.
That'll be when we have you back on.
Absolutely.
We got bubbles on bubbles. So yeah, maybe can you just walk us through kind of what to expect?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've got a non-vintage, 100% organic Chardonnay. It's from Sandy and Calceros vineyards. They're in the southern Spain, so La Mancha in Spain. So we've got 0 alcohol, 0, not even trace. We've got residual sugar of 2.9 grams per 100 milliliter. You may or may not know that you need more residual sugar essentially to make the alcohol-free process work for structure than you would potentially in an alcoholic sort of counterpart. We've got. Do you want to dive in? Have you popped your corks? Are we good to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah,
okay, fantastic. So I mean, see what you think, but I mean, typically sort of a ripe apple scent. You've got a little touch of sweetness on the nose. A little biscuity, which I like to find really in champagne. It would have been really fun to have done this blind. We did it one day. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't do it blind. You know, you have to be careful with messing with it. You know, people who obviously we would never do it blind if somebody didn't drink alcohol to try and mess with them, you know.
Yeah.
But it would have been, but it has been fun with sommeliers, because we did get a grower champagne on a blind tasting at a famous wine club in London. So it has, you know, I think what's interesting about wine tasting, anyone or drink tasting, anyone listening, you know, so much of it is
it's psychosomatic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did that. I had a bottle of alcohol-free wine that I gave my roommate, and I said, "Here, try this and let me know what you think on a scale of 1 to 10."
And you didn't tell them it was alcohol-free?
I did not. I said, I just got this new wine. Go ahead and tell me what you think. And they rated it a 9 out of 10.
There you
and I was
go.
like,
and
well,
that's a really
it's
important
alcohol-free.
lesson.
And they were like, wait,
really
what?
Important lesson. Yeah, so take your sip, see how it sort of hits your palate. What I really wanted from Noughty was, again, sorry to keep harking back, was what happens when a champagne hits my palate, and I get excited. You know, we've popped the cork, we've done the ritual, we've got nice glassware, and we feel like the party might be about to start. I want that thing where, I suppose in the wine world, we call it sort of that satiability. It's like when the saliva gets going. It's like when you start to think about.
I have that going now. The bubbles are bringing that out, and then the bubbles just make me want to smile more.
Absolutely, and they make you kind of feel. I feel a little bit excited, and I start to think, oh, what am I having for my supper? You know, am I going to have a few little party snacks? Am I going to have a little Parmesan if I'm not vegan? Am I going to have a few little salted cashew nuts? Might I have a little truffle risotto later, or maybe some Asian food?
It would go great with a charcuterie platter with some cured meats and everything.
Right. And then really, the most important thing for me is, do I want to drink more? You know, I mean, I think we can really geek out forever about drinks and tasting, but going back to my point about palate and taste, and do you want more of it? Do you want to sip again?
Yes, I do.
You know, and you're right. And balance for me is something that it's almost like if it isn't integral and you're thinking about it, then it's off kilter. So I was always searching for perfect balance, which for me is synonymous with perfect taste. And I feel, hopefully you agree, that we've got the balance here, which gives you that structure. Interestingly, with alcohol-free, it's impossible to get the weight of alcohol. But what I really love about Noughty is I think that you don't notice the lack of weight because you've got that you know, those lovely bubbles. But also, I think because of that freshness of flavor, and we haven't gone overboard with the sugar, which I believe still keeps that balance there for you.
Absolutely.
And alcohol is so important for like mouthfeel, like you were saying. So like people, so it's kind of interesting that like how these products are marketed to people, because it is inevitable that it's not going to taste just like a normal wine because how important alcohol is.
Well, it's interesting because I would say yes to you, and yet I'm sometimes blown away. I had someone sober who freaked the hell out with Noughty, and I don't say that lightly. What I mean is, they said, I mean, I don't think I can drink that because it reminds me too much of. And equally, we've had the blind tasting where a famous sommelier thought it was a grower champagne. So my typical answer would be yes. And of course, we know it's alcohol-free, so we're playing in a different space now with our minds. But I've been surprised at how many industry people haven't really associated it in that way. And I guess what's interesting for me about entering the alcohol-free space is I'm all about just saying, is it bloody delicious? And is it perfect on its own? And I think a lot of what the conventional drinking world tends to do, those of us who do still drink, is we're always looking at something and benchmarking, and then we're often recognizing or arguing that something comes up as pejorative compared with this in the alcohol space. And I think what we all need to start doing in the alcohol-free world is saying, is this delicious? You know, and I'm not afraid for this to be tasted against champagnes and Prosecco's because I know how good it is. But I do think sometimes we miss the point when we're doing that in a way.
Absolutely. And I think because of just our brains, I mean, it's inevitable that we're going to compare this to past things that we've consumed. And I think, especially like your product specifically, having it with like the bubbles. So like the brain, it first off, like your taste buds are kind of just compiled of that carbonation and the flavor. So it really takes away from the I guess, I don't want to say a lack of mouthfeel with your product, but the bubbles really hide, you know, the alcohol being removed.
And I think you get wine people are obsessed with a finish. You get a finish with Noughty, you see, and that for me is what you're also searching for. And I think we didn't talk about the 100% organic thing. You get that beautiful freshness, I think. I mean, you know, for me, what is upsetting about a lot of alcohol-frees and alcoholic wines too, actually, at a certain price point when makers don't take care, is that you add a ton of sugar, you add the chemicals, and then you get what they call satiability. You get that thing on the palate where people think it tastes okay, and then it's technically a little bit dead or flat, and it's not alive in a way. And of course, wine, alcohol-free drinks, you know, they should be alive, and that is for me what the organic element brings. It brings you that freshness that I just love.
Absolutely. And have you found any like non-alcoholic wines out there that are good that aren't sparkling?
I've struggled. I mean, I've been asked to consult on a few projects. I think it's very difficult, particularly with red wine. Going back to, we've talked about mouthfeel. With red wine, you want that really rich viscosity. I mean, I do. Most of us do with red wine. I think red wine is a struggle. There's something that I think is quite delicious that is not trying to be a red wine, which I guess goes back to my point about let's try and make wonderful drinks that aren't copies of or pejorative, but are perhaps doing their own thing. And there's a sort of red drink called I don't know what they call it. They don't call it a wine. Three Spirit. Are you familiar with Three Spirit?
I've actually seen their Instagram, but I'm not too well.
Okay, it's in the US. I would encourage you to try. See, that for me is almost the sort of thing I would have instead of red wine, if that makes sense, if I was drinking something alcohol-free. I think we're a little way maybe in the world from producing what I would consider the perfect red or white. I think a lot of German makers are doing a very good job with alcohol-free Rieslings, and they've been doing that for quite some time. And I think a lot of those, I think with the whites, when you're chilling them, you know, I think that they bring different things to the table, but I think red's a challenge, frankly.
Absolutely. So many components to it, and some of those are lost throughout the way they're currently being made. It'll be interesting to see with the branding of these products, because like me personally, like I see like your product right here, it's like another champagne, right? I don't see it as like being, you know, alcohol free exactly, but it's just another champagne out there. So I'm intrigued to see more of these products come out and actually just be a part of the industry. They're not separate, you know what I mean? I don't think they should ever be separate, because it's the beauty of wine. There's so many vast different wines all around the world. And yeah, they're all good. I mean, for the most part, there's all good wines all around the world, and it's going to be unique to see all the cool non-alcoholic.
The only caveat to the not being separate thing I would say is, and I know America, I've been digging into this conversation recently with a lot of my American friends in the drinks world. Of course, you've been through Prohibition, right? I mean, you guys are young, but the older generations, you know, and you have that history embedded in your culture. I guess, obviously, we haven't here. And I think that, you know, I think it's important for me as well that there's also the recognition of the separateness for those who don't drink and literally don't drink for whatever their reason. And I've understood that there's a certain reticence among some of the American community to, you know, really target, I suppose, the sober community. Whereas in London, for example, you know, I think there's a bit more of a relaxed approach to that, and it's quite, you know, it's quite fashionable, dare I say, to be sober, you know, and I don't think we have quite the same relationship with that being a sort of a scary thing that the mainstream community might sort of not want to associate with. I mean, I know this is quite a deep subject I'm getting into, but what I guess I'm alluding to is, to go back to your point, Tyler, absolutely it should have a seat at the table, I believe, alongside champagnes. But also what's interesting for me about Noughty is it is zero alcohol, so it can also operate beautifully and successfully for those who, for all manner of reasons, choose not to drink, whether that be because they are sober properly, whether they're pregnant, whether they're, you know, designated drivers, whether they're pilots, or whatever, religious reasons, you know what I mean? And I think together and separate, for me, is they're both relevant opportunities, I guess.
Absolutely. It's like another attribute to wines. So just like how there's like sugar content, like where it's from, the terroir, like all that stuff, it like adds another attribute to how you can improve a wine or differentiate from others. So I think that's especially what you're saying. That's when it can really come into. And yeah, it definitely needs to be well known to consumers. Like obviously, it can't just be another champagne. But then again,
right.
You know what I mean? It's how to do both. I guess it's the mixture, and it's all with branding and reality. But how important, especially companies like yourself, are so new to the industry, that you guys are like setting the precedence to many other companies, and how, you know, consumers really view these products. So it is really vital to how it's branded right now.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, we don't take that lightly, because in the UK, for example, I'm doing a bit of work on lobbying for clarification on the category. And I'm also speaking to a few people in New York as well, because I think the term no low is being adopted by the industry. But of course, technically, no and low are quite different things. And low actually doesn't mean anything at all, because your definition of low will be different from some American body who's trying to make a legal definition versus a UK definition. So I think we are in a bit of a minefield. And so what we've decided to do with Noughty is just be very clear that we are no alcohol, zero. And that's just a very clear stance on that.
Absolutely. And I hope more companies start being more clear as well. We've seen some American companies marketing their non-alcoholic wine specifically to pregnant women, at saying that there is alcohol in there, because there are portions of alcohol in non-alcoholic wines in the US. But I'm hoping for more clarity, like how you're doing. It's 0%. It is alcohol free. It's 100%. There's 0% alcohol. But yeah, so I guess getting into kind of the end of this beautiful podcast episode that I've enjoyed a lot, especially my taste buds. But what is the future of Noughty and yourself? Like what are we looking forward to?
Well, I want global domination. I'm pretty ambitious for the brand. And I think the early steps into your wonderful country have proved to me that America is particularly fascinating for us, because we only launched there, Thanksgiving? And we've already been in the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Mag, all over the US in the press. What have I missed? I've missed Washington Post, New York Times, LA Mag. We've had some crazy... Oh, Wine Enthusiast. I've missed your famous wine paper. Thank you, Tyler. Wine Enthusiast. How can I miss that, right? So literally wall-to-wall media coverage. I mean, you can't buy that. I mean, that's insane. And that's literally wonderful people like you spreading the word in your drinks industry who are getting excited about Noughty. Now, that for me signifies the incredible opportunity Noughty has, not just in the US, but globally. And so we want to be the alternative to champagne and sparkling wine that doesn't have alcohol. It's a pretty simple win. I mean, there's so many different exciting alcohol-free sort of drinks that are developed out there. And I know you've got some wonderful stuff when it comes to alcohol-free beers, alcohol-free spirits. But there's a really clear, wide open opportunity for me now with this sparkling. And I think we're making incredible headway. So I would hope the only way's up when it comes to that. And we've got a rosé launching. Noughty Rosé is launching in the spring. So that's super exciting. And we've also got ready to drink cans that will come on board later in the year. So I think it's going to be a crazy sort of year for us, and particularly in the US, which I'm looking forward to sort of spending a bit more time in as soon as I'm allowed, once we've got COVID dealt with on both sides of the pond.
Absolutely. Yeah, which is amazing. I'm excited, especially for that rosé. That's going to be interesting, especially in cans as well. That's also going to be a unique experience for sure. Where can people find your product? I know that you can find it a lot of places, but where should they look towards?
Sure. So, absolutely. So we're with Thompson Family Wines, and they've got a website out of California. So that's direct to consumer, and they can ship pretty much anywhere. We are with Better Roads, which is in Connecticut. Again, direct to consumer online. Low and No out of Detroit. And then very soon, watch this space, we're going to have our own Noughty AF website, which will be geo-specific across the US. So it'll make all of that super easy to find. But basically, we've got our 3 key partners. And I've missed out. How could I miss out? Texas, huge state. So we're in Texas, which was actually an incredible early on board opportunity with Central Markets. So we sell with them as well. So we've got some wonderful hubs: Texas, California, New York, Connecticut, Detroit. So that's where we are. We've had Derek Brown, who's an incredible drinks person in the US, has done a lot for us already, talking about us in the American market. So he's hopefully going to launch us in his Columbia Rum Bar in Washington. So I know you guys are from Baltimore, so soon to launch in Washington. And then once COVID hopefully starts to dissipate soon around the world, we're looking then to start launching in various bars and restaurants across your country.
Beautiful, beautiful. Maybe one day we can meet up in Washington and have our own little NA happy hour.
I would love that.
Absolutely. Well, hey, this was an absolute pleasure. I think Chris could also agree with this. Your product
Absolutely.
is definitely one of the best non-alcoholic wines we've definitely tried.
I prefer the best, but I'll take that.
One of the best, as in there's really not much out there besides this one. Is really
You're number one in my book.
You know, I knew I loved Chris.
What can I say? I'm a schmoozer.
Absolutely. Well,
Well,
hey,
thank
once
you.
again, it's a pleasure. Yeah, and we've completely enjoyed this. It was,
Oh, well, listen, thank you so much for having me. Now, if you indulge me, it's definitely really happy hour here in the UK. So I'm going to do another toast to you. The pleasure's been mine. So lovely to spend the time. Thank you, guys.
absolutely
Thank you.
cheers.